So, hello, everybody. My name is Colin Marshall, professor at the University of Washington. Really excited to host this public forum, which is proposed by Daniel Galley, also here at the University of Washington, on the topic of persuasion and deference. It's exciting. This is a new format for the APA. We're excited to try it. I'll also say, technical difficulties. We're working on getting Terry Price's volume, but it's better than having a speaker stuck in an airport. So it is an advantage of the virtual format. I see we've got at least one watch party on the list here, Northern Virginia Community College Honors Program. Great to have you all with us. The format of the session is going to be as follows. I'm putting a Google Doc link into the chat. What we'll have is I'll do some sort of quick introductions of our three speakers. We have a case to set things up, and then some discussion questions. So the thought is then we'll go through that. The first chunk of the session will be our three speakers, Terry, Gina, and George, taking these questions wherever they want to go. And then roughly halfway through, we'll open things up. That's the plan. And this really is meant to be a topic that just invites all sorts of perspectives and different angles. So excited to do it. So if you can go to the Google Doc link that's there in the chat. Give people a minute there. So our participants are Terry Price from the Jepson School of Leadership Studies at the University of Richmond, George Tsai from the Department of Philosophy at the University of Hawaii, and Regina Rini from Department of Philosophy at York University. Organizer who put together this session is Daniel Galley, a doctoral student at the University of Washington. My name is Colin Marshall. So here's a case that this comes from some of Daniel's work. We adjusted it for this session. And it's meant to be a case to sort of get us going on some of the philosophical, ethical issues here. So we imagine that Agnes is a climate scientist and Olivia is her daughter. Agnes wants to persuade Olivia that it's morally wrong to consume animal products, even when the animals are raised humanely. Since Olivia, Agnes's daughter, is concerned about environmental issues, Agnes tells Olivia that abstaining from animal products can help mitigate climate change. But since the details of climate science and animal agriculture are complex, Agnes doubts that her daughter will understand the exact connections between dietary choices and climate change. Even so, Agnes hopes that her daughter will defer to her. Okay, so that's our case. It's an attempted case of persuasion. It involves this sort of hope for deference. So here's some questions that our three panelists will start with. And they can choose any one of these that jumps out to them. So first question, what is one additional detail that we could add to this case that would make Agnes's action either morally problematic or morally permissible or even morally admirable? It's a fairly bare bones case. You can imagine fleshing out other background features of the case in different ways. So what are details we could add that would change the moral profile of the case? That's the first question. Second question, in a morally problematic version of the case, right? So you add in whatever factors you think would make Agnes's action problematic. What moral factors would make it problematic, right? Morally speaking, what would tip this towards there's a problem here? And then our third discussion question is, in cases like this, how is rational autonomy relevant? Right? So how is an individual's rational autonomy and others' relation to that autonomy relevant in cases like this involving the ethics of deference? Okay, so that's our setup. So invitation to Gina, Terry, or George, whoever wants to jump in on any of the questions, and then we'll just sort of let things flow from there.
Okay, I'll kick us off if
Thank you, Gina. Yeah.
Everybody else jumps up. So first, thanks to Daniel and Colin for putting this together. I think this will be a really fun discussion. So to my mind, a really important question is, how old is Olivia? I assume that this prompt was written deliberately ambiguously to promote us thinking about that. We know Olivia is Agnes's daughter, but for all the prompt says, Olivia may be 35 years old. So one question is Agnes speaking to an actual child or just to her child who is a grown adult with full moral agency? And I hope people can guess why that might matter. But I'm actually curious whether anyone else in the panel thinks it might that it doesn't matter or doesn't think it matters as much as I do.
I would agree too that certainly the age of the target of the rational persuasion matters a great deal, whether we're dealing here with a young child or someone who's an adult child. I think issues of power and perhaps abuse of power that I think is possible with rational persuasion are, make a big difference in this sort of case.
I think I'm in.
Yeah, sounds like you're in, Terry. Great.
That was easy. Yeah, so I was kind of half listening there as I was trying to get in. But thanks for allowing me to join. Yeah, the I guess age. I did hear age as a possible consideration that would make a moral difference in this case. One thing that's important for me is whether the mother has been asked, whether she's been invited in to the deliberation in this case. It's not real clear what the nature of the relationship is. Also not real clear to me, the prompt says, or the example says that she's concerned about these issues. And concern is one thing. We don't know how deep this value is for her. But I can imagine a scenario in which is a very deep value for her. Her mother knows it's a very deep value for her, and she has deferred to her mother to some extent when it comes to climate issues because she wants to achieve particular kinds of ends.
Yeah, I like that point. It does matter, right? Whether Olivia invited this conversation. Terry, to bounce it back to you, I'm curious, do you think of that as a kind of a necessary condition? Like suppose we add to the case that, well, let's stipulate for the moment, Olivia is an adult, maybe a young adult, maybe she's a college age student, and anyway, but she's an adult. Let's stipulate that, and then let's add the following. Agnes has noticed that Olivia consumes a lot of animal, and unsolicited, she decides to let Olivia know what she thinks about it. Since you raised the question of the relationship and the open, whether or not the advice was solicited, Terry, do you think that would change the moral status of what Agnes is doing here?
I do tend to think of it as a necessary condition. I'm inclined to the view that rational persuasion, generally speaking, is problematic in the same ways that other influence tactics are problematic, potentially at least. So yes, yeah, I think that's a necessary condition, like it is for other forms of influence. And I can say more later if you want about why I think it's problematic, but yes.
Could you say a little bit more right now? Because I can imagine a scenario like, Agnes is deeply convinced this stuff really matters. Suppose
Mhm.
Olivia is some kind of like TikTok influencer whose influence is about what's good food to consume, and she has a huge audience, and she's just constantly eating animal products in front of 10 million impressionable young people. Like,
Yeah.
is there some point at which it becomes reasonable for Agnes to intervene despite not being invited in?
Well, there is I guess I think one of the questions we were asked is what would make it admirable or permissible or something like that. If it were the case that we can make the case that there's harm or wrongful action, then just like other things, coercion, manipulation, deception, all the influence tactics, if all those things are permissible or potentially permissible, then so would rational persuasion be. But you have to build up some story for me to explain, the wrong and the harm in this particular case.
So in your view, Terry, do you not see rational persuasion as standing in a special relation to autonomy in comparison to these other tactics, influence tactics you described, like manipulation, coercion, and so forth? There's no kind of anything distinct about rational persuasion with respect to autonomy.
Well, I think in certain contexts, like when you're when you've been invited in, then it plays have some special connection to rational persuasion. But short of that, I don't think so. I think my view is pretty similar, fairly similar to your view in some ways, except maybe more radical. So it's just, I mean, the view I read in the paper, the paternalism paper, that, I don't think it's just limited to cases of paternalism. And part of the argument is that I think rational persuasion, and here again, so part of this persuasion, when you're persuading someone, no matter how you're doing it, you're trying to get them to do something. You're not just getting not in something more than just to engage with reasons. You're trying to get them to behave in a certain way or to think something or to feel something. And and in doing so, it's kind of a practical piece of this, which is I think when you engage in rational persuasion, you're necessarily drawing on aspects of the other influence tactics, like the source where it comes from. So see here, this person, Agnes, is an authority. The source, issues about the context, like what the relationship is. So we're more likely to be persuaded by people who are more like us. The form it comes in. I mean, reasons just don't come. They don't sit alone by themselves, but they come in some form or other. So even things like tone, when you're trying to persuade someone, they make you more influential or not. The framing of the reasons that you give people, and one of the biggest parts for me is the selection of reasons that you give people, because there's an infinite number of things, or near infinite number of things you could say about any particular case, and you have to select which ones to give. And so when people try to persuade you, they are somewhat selective in the reasons that they have to be, because they're trying to get you to do something or think something or get you in one direction, which is different from maybe rational reflection or rational engagement. And even that, though, I think even rational reflection and engagement could be problematic. I mean, imagine you're sitting minding your own business, and I come up to you and don't try to persuade you to believe something, but try to get you to engage rationally or something with some issue. Even like a teacher, if I just said, well, here's a problem, and here are considerations on both sides, without trying to move you in any one particular direction. I just think for me, it's the intervention, the interference piece that puts it roughly in the same categories of the other kinds of influence tactics.
Wait, help me understand something. You said intervention, interference back to back, and those are very different things in my head. This is a case of intervention, but I'm not seeing it as interference yet, right? If Agnes is providing legitimate reasons based upon her expertise, and she's not bullshitting, and she's not trying to present misleading information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, stipulating all of that, why is it interference?
She's inserted herself, but maybe that's just intervention and not interference. Yeah, I guess trying to get her to do something that she would not otherwise have done strikes me as interfering with her and her own decision making, her own processes. Not you. You're saying you don't see it that way.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, we have to stipulate some pretty demanding conditions about, and maybe in a moment we can switch to the thing that I think is most important. But for the moment, leave it to the side. Assuming a bunch of good conditions are met, yeah, I just don't see there being an in principle problem with somebody stepping in and saying, "Look, I'm seeing what you're doing here, and let me try to respectfully, civilly, with an openness to going back and forth, providing good reasons, convince you to be otherwise." And it just looks to me like that by itself can't be a bad thing and might be a good thing. So could you say a bit more about why you see that as potentially objectionable in and of itself?
If you, what if I see you, I've just met you for the first time, but assume I hadn't met you, and I see you sitting outside and look out my window at the courtyard on campus, and you're there. I don't know you from anybody else, and I see you eating meat, and I just walk up to you out of the blue. That's an intervention, and I kind of think an interference. But you don't.
What if you see me sitting out in the courtyard actively abusing a dog?
There, now we're getting, yeah. So I think a lot's going to turn here on the wrongness of the wrongness of the behavior. So yes, if you're abusing a dog, first step, ask you to stop.
Why is that not interference?
What is, yeah, but I think it's justified in that particular case, and because you're engaging in potentially justified because you're engaging in harm of some fashion. So this case, the way it's written out, we know the animals are properly raised, properly treated, all that stuff. And so to build the harm case, we're going to have to do something like you did before about, great impact or whatever it is. The other inclination or temptation I have about this is that it's actually worse in the moral cases than other cases. That moral sway, and saying this as an ethicist, that it's actually more, it may have to do with the difficulty of some of these issues. And so, beating a dog strikes me as not that difficult. You eating meat out in the courtyard here, connecting that up to, climate change, whatever else, is a harder case to make.
Does this come down to whether it's true or not, like in meta-ethical terms, whether it's true that eating meat is bad because it contributes to climate change? Is that what the interference question turns on?
It would have to be more than just bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would have to be, I think, yeah, I think it have to be not just bad, but harmful in maybe in some fairly serious way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if I could jump in here, I think I'd share Regina's intuition that there needn't be anything problematic about these cases of intervention and interference. I mean, for me, it seems to me that the problematic rational persuasion or instances where it might start to shade into coercion and browbeating actually happened not at the kind of at the beginning or intervention stage, but rather if it's been going on for a long time, if you've been offering reasons and you've been trying, and the other person just doesn't accept them at the end of the day, but you continue to persist, then that seems to be more problematic. So it seems to be like temporally speaking on the other end of things rather than at the beginning. It seems like, I mean, of course, in my rational persuasion paper, I talk about cases where you should give the other party enough time to work things out for themselves. But assuming that one respects it, there's nothing. I think one could intervene, but it's cases where rational persuasion starts to appear morally problematic happen when it seems like there may be no more point. They're not, the other party's unmoved, but if you start to, you continue on, then it looks to be more like a case of browbeating at that point. And I think that's where it might seem to be morally problematic.
So if I remember correctly, you've got three conditions, right? Is that right? Like the insulting part, the distrust part, and the intrusion part. And I guess is that right? I'm most moved by the.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in that paper, I was trying to make the case that rational persuasion can look like paternalism, or in morally relevant respects is like objectionable paternalism. But I think there's kind of just the more general issue of when rational persuasion is morally acceptable or not, or when it's disrespectful or not. Yeah. So.
Well, did neither of you find it? I mean, let's move away from. No, I shouldn't move away from the case too much. But let's what if I, and this may just be switching from kind of, paternalism to moralism or something, but what if you are sitting out in the courtyard and you are doing something that I think is morally bad. It's not against your interest, but I think it's immoral for you to do it. But I don't think it's harmful to anyone. And then I don't manipulate you or deceive you or coerce you or anything else, but I just walk up to you and intervene. And I say, maybe even, I don't know everything about morality, but here are some reasons I think that you should not be doing X, Y, and Z. You don't find that moral meddling
Oh, I
problem?
do. I mean, I think the relation one stands to the other matters. Like, is this just a stranger? Is this someone you know, a colleague, an acquaintance? Is it someone you're in a close relationship with? I mean, I think that all matters, as well as like exactly what the problematic behavior is. Like it's, yeah, how bad it is and what exactly, like, I mean, I guess in the case you described, only the self is harmed by but no one else is being harmed by the behavior.
It's not a behavior that I'm assuming is, because I was trying to distinguish from the paternalism cases. It's not a behavior you think is harmful to the person. Uh, the person, it's not harmful at all. It's a morally wrong behavior. And maybe there's, if you don't buy that there are any moral wrongs that aren't harmful, then you're not going to buy the case.
I mean, what would be just like an example, like
I've got it.
yeah.
And I'm intentionally constructing this case so that the moral view is implausible, because I'm going to defend the view that this is not interference, even when the moral view has no plausible claim on truth. I'm sitting on the bench. Terry comes along and wants to convince me that it is morally wrong for me to be sitting on a bench that is painted blue. I should be sitting on the other bench across the courtyard, which is painted red. It's wrong, Terry says, to sit on things that are painted blue. Blue is the color of the sky. The sky is a high aspiration. Okay, this is a view, I take it, has no likelihood of being true. I think it's perfectly fine for Terry to do this. So far, no line has been crossed to make it morally objectionable. Now, if Terry proceeds to browbeating and condescending and providing me with information Terry knows to be false, that changes things. But so far, the mere attempt to provide persuasive moral reasons by a sincere interlocutor who is acting respectfully, I'm just not seeing what the problem is so far up to this point.
Would you find it problematic if I used other influence tactics?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it was supposed to be by other influence tactics, but I'm assuming you mean manipulative, deceptive ones. And yeah, that would be bad. But so far that hasn't happened.
And that's just because I'm giving you reasons.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you're
So,
engaging with me
yeah.
as an equal moral agent, who someone who's equally morally accountable to you and to others, and you are treating me as the ultimate decider of my actions, but you're providing me with reasons in the hopes that I will reevaluate them in a way that you regard as accurate.
And if I say, if I say this to you, so I'm the one with the crazy views about the benches, and you say, mind your own damn business.
It depends. It might, I mean, like, if a close family member of mine just died and I was trying to, on my phone, deal with the funeral arrangements, like that, it'd be pretty reasonable at that point for me to like dismiss you abruptly. I'm excused. But if I had nothing better to do and you were polite and respectful and sincere, yeah, that would be the wrong response for me to give. I should be polite and respectful in response.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to say none of your damn business, and think I would be justified in saying that because this person has intervened and is interfering, or if I were in your shoes. But
Great. So this is one of the issues I think Daniel and I were hoping would come out. So it's excellent. We've been around this track. I was wondering if I could nudge the three of you. We'll go for maybe another, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, the three of you, before opening it up. But I did want to see if we can nudge things towards the question of deference specifically. Because there's the broader question about when rational persuasion is permissible. But one thing I think Daniel offers this case with an eye towards is, when is it appropriate to sort of expect others to defer to you? So maybe assume we set things up so that there's no problem now in some form of rational engagement. But when is asking or expecting someone to defer to you problematic or not problematic?
I guess I want a bit more clarification on what deference is, but it seems to me that if the rational persuasion takes on the form of a kind of rational discussion where the two parties can be described as like together trying to figure out the right answer, then that seems less problematic than if it seems like more one way, where the person engaging in rational persuasion seems to presume that they know better than the target, or that they that their deliberative capacities are superior or should be given more weight. But they're also, I guess it also matters like what's going on. Are you pointing out like just factual mistakes? Are you pointing out like errors in reasoning? I think of Williams' like internal external reasons in the obscurity of blame paper, where he's pointing out various forms of like idealization one has to make in one's reasoning. And of course, he's interested in the issue of like the conditions for an agent's having practical reasons, whether they're conditional on the subjective motivational set of the agent, their desires broadly. But there he talks about forms of ways in which you can idealize the reasoning, the deliberation, like correcting errors, matters of fact. Maybe the agent is not imaginatively. One could help the agent like consider imaginatively cases that they might have overlooked, or pointing out kind of errors in their instrumental reasoning. So I think all of that seems to make a difference too. So yeah, so I guess when you were asking your question, Colin, were you thinking about kind of deference with respect to like some matter of fact or something else?
So the Daniel's case, I think, is one where it's and yeah, that is helpful, George, that there's different types of deference. But this is one where it's specifically about the connections between two things. So so Agnes says, here's some facts about here's climate change, here's dietary choices. Eating meat is bad because of stuff relating to climate change. But she doesn't expect Olivia to be able to appreciate the connections well enough, because they're complicated, and yet she still expects Olivia to defer to her.
So imagine a two-step argument. Step one is a bunch of empirical premises about the causal connections between climate change and animal product consumption. Step two is a normative premise that says, if the causal connections are as specified in step one, then it is wrong to consume animal products. Let's suppose Olivia accepts premise two. So she accepts that if the causal connections are that way, then it would be wrong to consume animal products, but she does not accept premise one. In that case, the fact that Agnes is a climate scientist and Olivia evidently is not, and the matter that's in dispute is simply, I shouldn't say simply, but for this purpose, it is simply a factual one about a topic in which one person is a domain expert and the other is not, it seems obvious to me that Olivia ought to defer to Agnes's expertise, causal expertise on the matter. So if things are lined up the way I just described them, then it looks like an easy case to me. It's a lot harder if Olivia is unsure of her attitude toward the normative premise, or if she actually accepts Agnes's view on the empirical premise, and then the dispute is about the normative premise. Then it looks like Agnes's status as a climate scientist might not matter, and I think that's a lot harder to know what to do with.
When you say that, Regina, are you implicitly? How old are you sort of imagining Agnes to be here, or rather Olivia.
I'm assuming Olivia's an adult.
Oh, I see. Okay. So then, would anything change if Olivia is a young child? Because I mean, it seems like, of course, we could entertain the question of like oughts with respect to deference, but if the child is sufficiently young, she will just naturally defer, I think, to the parent.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. If Olivia is sufficiently young, if we're talking about a young
Yeah.
child, then yeah, I mean, at a certain age of development, it's not really open to a child to make the sort of thing we would regard constitutively as a moral judgment. So at that point, yeah, deference makes sense. And in fact, a parent has a duty to help a child develop those capacities. But it's kind of mysterious exactly what we're talking about when we talk about very early childhood development. Older children, teenagers can certainly do moral reasoning. So far as I'm concerned for this purpose, I'm assuming, to make things simple for the moment, I'm assuming that Olivia is old enough to make accountable moral judgments. And then if that's the case, then that kind of distinction I made between the normative reasons and the empirical reasons, I think, starts to become really important. This brings to something I would flag as a really important issue, which is whether Agnes is being entirely sincere. So I'm following the exercise rubric here and trying to add in elements that are not mentioned. So it's said in the description of the case that that Agnes, she wants to persuade Olivia it's morally wrong to consume animal products even when the animals are raised humanely, and she happens to be an climate scientist. But we could add in something. We could add in Agnes knows that actually the climate science is kind of shaky, and she can't really prove to a sufficient scientific standard that Olivia's choices regarding her meat consumption will matter that much. But Agnes, for independent moral reasons, just really doesn't want her daughter eating meat, and so she's kind of like evasive about exactly how the causal things work. So she's just hoping that her authority as a climate scientist will make Olivia defer, even though she can't actually substantiate the empirical premises she wants to use. If all of that's true, basically Agnes is not really being sincere, then I think she's done something quite bad. She's really crossed the line in terms of what rational persuasion requires. But I'm curious whether anybody else thinks that maybe this is idiosyncratic, that I'm marking that as the really firm boundary, when I'm otherwise okay with Terry coming up to me in the park and telling me to get off the blue bench.
I think for me, the permissibility of the deference has to be connected, assuming Olivia is an adult, it has to come from her. And I think that could work either way. I mean, I think it could be in the last sentence, even so, Agnes hopes her daughter will defer to her. Not clear there whether it means, because we don't know what Agnes is going to do exactly. Whether it means just defer to her authority. She could just say, look, I'm a climate scientist, I've been around the block. This is the way it works. Or it could be, I'm going to give her the reasons I think that she can understand and hope she defers. For me, both of those are kind of the same. That it has to, if Olivia says, look, I don't understand this stuff, but these are my values, and Mom, I hope you can help me make some choices here, whatever else, then deference to authority, fine. Deference to reasons, fine. George said earlier, I think George seems less convinced. The blue bench, red bench, he's maybe more bothered than Regina when it comes to strangers, but less bothered when it comes to relationships. And I think that's right too, but I think there's not just a relationship. I think it's that relationships have certain facts about them that we invite each other in to exercise this kind of influence. And part of it is that a lot of things we do together, a lot of things we do collectively. And so the decisions we make are things we have to, negotiate, and we have to, give each other reasons. And I think it's that, for me, that's the in any relationship in which this is going to be justified, I think we have to explain how a person has, the real core would be that the one person has invited the other person in a way that you did not invite me in, Regina, when you're sitting on the bench.
I think that's right. Although I think we should still allow, though, for cases where one could just approach another without being asked to approach, or where one is given permission or consent to be approached. So the point about invitation could be adjusted where, you know, if I approach the person on the bench and they make clear that they're not interested, then I should, you know, walk away. But if they seem to welcome a conversation, then I think that would not violate the point you're making about invitation. That could still count as not using the notion of invitation that you were using. That would not count as like approaching someone uninvited. Right?
So is the question just what the default is? And then
I guess so you're saying, well, the importance of being invited, right? That the target invites the rational persuader. And I'm saying that can be fine, but we should still allow for morally permissible cases of just approaching someone where they haven't actually asked you to approach them or asked for your opinion on the matter. But you seem to think that you have the view that one should be asked.
well, I don't know if asked. Yeah, but
question here is like, what counts as an invitation, and like, or like, you know, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, showing up, people who showed up here today have invited us to say what we think about these issues, and can't complain. You know, I think about you know, someone reads your article or reads your work, or someone takes a class with you. There are maybe other kinds of contexts. You be in a particular context and you can read from the context that this, you know, you're open to this. You know, you're open to, if you go to a sports, man, it's not going to work so well. Trying to think of where you might go where people are on opposing sides and they're maybe trying to influence you to be on one side or the other. And you probably wouldn't be justified in saying, leave me alone, I should get to decide for myself. You know, no, we're going to yell for our side, they're going to yell for their side. So cases like that, well, the cases I'm worried about are, you know, even the street preacher or whatever, who's like, you know, you're minding your own business and the person says, let me tell you something that's true, that's going to change your life and for eternity. I think that strikes me as the default's the other direction. Sit there with your religious text and your sign, maybe. So even the sign could be, maybe think about that as a type of influence too. But sit there, and then if someone says, hey, I'd like to learn more about X, then that to me, the default's it's going to be a stricter default.
Yeah, I guess I don't find that kind of case so problematic. I mean, if I say no, thank you, and then the preacher persists, then that seems to be, then we shade into more potentially problematic kind of scenario. But if they approach, but yeah,
I want to circle back on deference for a couple minutes if we can. I think it's really important to distinguish the empirical element of deference, the domain expertise, from the moral or normative element. Because I think that we can very much owe deference to an expert in a domain, but I'm not sure we can owe deference on the normative part. And so I want to try to illustrate this with a case. I'm just going to take Agnes and Olivia as the names of the relevant players, but I'm going to change what they're disagreeing about. So where I grew up in Detroit, it's a tradition for some people to celebrate the 4th of July and New Year's Eve by going in their backyard and firing their guns in the air. So you make your own fireworks, right? It's quite loud. It's not great for dogs. Okay, but also the bullets come back down, right? Eventually, and every now and then, very rarely, but every now and then somebody gets hit. All right, so now here's our version of the story. Olivia, she's an adult. Olivia's in the backyard firing her gun in the air on New Year's Eve. Agnes, her mother, who is a ballistic scientist who analyzes firearms for the police as her job, comes out in the backyard and says, you shouldn't be doing that. Those bullets come back down. They can hit people. Olivia says, no, they don't come back down. They just keep going up forever. Now, at that point, Olivia ought to defer to her mother. Her mother knows ballistics. Her mother knows how this works. She ought to defer on the empirical side. But now modify the case just slightly. Olivia's like, okay, mom, you're right. Yeah, I get the bullets come back down, but like there's a lot of space here. The probability of them hitting anybody is pretty low, which is true. Probability is really low. And Olivia's like, the joy I get of firing my gun in the air outweighs the very small risk of somebody getting harmed. Now that's a normative claim. And I take it that Agnes is not in any special place to expect deference about that normative weighing of the joy versus the risk, in the sense that she is when it comes to the ballistic question of whether the bullets come back down. Does anybody disagree with me about drawing that distinction that way?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because something Terry said earlier, I thought was interesting, which is he said the deference has to come from, the target of the persuasion, and that seems to focus on like the way in which the deference is achieved or realized, whether it's coming from the target, and it raises a question like how it can also fail to do that. But you're kind of pointing rather in the other direction to kind of objective facts about the expertise possessed or the knowledge possessed by the persuader as bearing on the appropriateness of the deference or the or whether the target ought to defer.
Yeah, I take it that in domains like ballistic physics, some people have domain expertise and other people don't, and the people who don't have the expertise ought to defer epistemically to those who do. And I take that to be fairly non-controversial. The tricky part is when we move into the normative domain, and then we face questions about whether or not anyone can count as a domain expert in the normative domain, how we would recognize that. It's not the same, maybe I was about to say it's not the same thing as being employed to study ballistics, but maybe moral philosophers, I don't know, we could talk about that. And the point is, it's harder, right? And I take this to be kind of table stakes for the discussion, but I want to make sure people agree about that that's true, that these are different types of deference and that one is uncontroversial and the other one is controversial.
So are you saying anytime you hold a belief and there's someone who's, and I'm talking about moral beliefs here, but someone who's an expert, and you ought to defer to that person's beliefs about that issue? If I
About an empirical question,
yeah,
generally,
so
yeah, it's complicated.
I have reasons to believe I wouldn't be justified in how would this work? Hanging on to a belief. I guess part of this would be like, do we need to believe all true things, or do we need to have correct beliefs about all things? And then your gun shooting case, it has one reason we want her to defer is because someone's going to potentially get killed. Someone did get killed in Virginia a few years ago from doing this. So I wonder if it's something that doesn't have any kind of. It's just all that matters is having true beliefs. So I believe red benches are more comfortable than blue benches, but you, a professor in the sciences, know that's not true. And you ask me why I'm always sitting on the red benches, and I say because they're more comfortable than the blue benches. Well, one, I'm not sure you need to tell me the facts, but maybe yes. Do I need to defer to you on this? I don't know. Would that be a counterexample to your claim? Or if it,
I'm not quite sure what it means. It's pretty clear what it would be to be an expert on ballistic trajectories. It's clear to be an expert on the comfort of bench colors, just because for exactly what you say, it's a bit hard to know what that means exactly.
Well, there's nothing, you could say there's nothing about the paint that's going to change the feeling of this. And you're incorrect. You're incorrect to believe that. And then
Okay.
now I ought to defer to you. I guess the point is like, I mean, what's the force of an ought to defer on an empirical matter that has really no bearing on anything else other than, I mean, let's think you ought to have all true beliefs or as many true beliefs as you can have or something like that.
Yeah. No, okay, that's good. That's an interesting case. So I think the comfort thing is causing a bit of trouble here because there's a sense in which, to the extent that your comfort is constitutively partly determined by your subjective state, it would be
Yeah.
a bit weird to defer to other people on what your own subjective state is. But if we cash it out just in terms of like some sort of physical surface structure properties, and we agree that's what the debate is about. Not do I feel comfortable, but like, is the actual physical composition of red paint different from blue paint? Then yeah, you should defer to a material scientist on that question. You look like you're not sure I'm right.
I'm not completely sure.
Right. Since we're at a little bit of a pause, we're about halfway through, so maybe now is a good time to open up for questions, comments, thoughts from anyone else. And I guess I invite people to, you can put your hand up. You can also put something in the chat if that's easier. We've got, I see, we've got 2 watch parties joining us now, which is awesome. If it's easier to for you to do chat questions, and I will try not to miss anyone. It's always tough picking the first one. Daniel, also feel free to jump in too.
So I guess one question that I have, and thanks everyone for your comments. They've been, yeah, really intrigued with the conversation so far. I guess one comment that I have on this case that we're looking at, one thing I want to sort of dispute is whether or not Agnes is actually rationally persuading Olivia. Because when we look at Agnes doubts that her daughter will understand the exact connections between dietary choices and climate change. Agnes doubts that Olivia, in other words, will sort of appreciate the reasons that she's giving in support of uh, consuming or refraining from consuming animal products. And I'm wondering if this actually counts as rational persuasion, because and Regina, your paper really sort of influenced my view on this. What counts as rational persuasion is to give other people reasons, and you expect those on moral issues like this. You give them moral sort of reasons, and you expect them to change their mind because of those reasons. And this is what differentiates moral persuasion or rational persuasion from other sorts of influential tactics like manipulation and coercion. And so I just want to sort of like put that question out there. Is this even a case of rational persuasion or a moral persuasion? I want to claim that it's not, but I'm curious.
I'm going to take the other side on that. I think this can be, at least, I mean, it's assuming some other details about the case. And the reason why is this. You can provide people with reasons which are second order epistemic reasons of the form, I am an expert on this causal domain, you are not. I understand it better than you do. You probably should accept that I've probably got it right, even if you can't follow the details. And this case is complicated because there's lots of causal pieces going on here, but there are simpler cases like suppose that some really important data that's like deeply important to public health or whatever, it's really important to something, is being kept on an old-fashioned magnetic storage computer disk, and it's the only copy. And I'm like, don't wave that magnet around right next to it. You could erase all of the really important data. And you say, no, magnets don't work like that. And I say, no, they do. I'm a magnet scientist. I'm making this case up as I go. At that point, I mean, and you accept that I'm a magnet scientist. That's key. If you accept that I understand magnets better than you do, at this point, you ought to accept that as a second order epistemic reason, to accept that what I'm telling you is a reason for you to not wave the magnet around right near the really vulnerable data. Right? Doesn't that count as rational?
Yeah, that doesn't count as more. It doesn't feel like moral persuasion, though. What you're persuading me of isn't a moral question. And going back to your paper, right? You specified moral sort of persuasion, and it's different from just rational persuasion, sort of broadly construed. And this is why you said, I think, moral persuasion. And so I'm wondering if it is a moral question. Um, I'm wondering, yeah, how could you be an expert in like these moral questions, right? And I'm wondering, yeah.
Yeah, no, good, good. I think that we all, I think we're all, I don't think there are moral experts in the relevant sense. I don't think anybody owes deference to anybody else in the moral domain as a function of their moral competence. But I do think that we all owe a certain amount of leeway to each other in the moral domain as moral equals. So this gets complicated, and it's hard to try to explain on the fly. And I don't think I've published exactly what I'm saying right now. But this is a tricky put with the word deference, because normally deference refers to a kind of epistemic superiority, kind of expertise, and I don't think we need to assume that's possible in the moral domain to still think that our moral opinions should weigh on each other in some way, that we should care what each other thinks about morality, even if we don't think anybody is an epistemic superior in the moral domain.
Okay, related to that, we have a question from the chat. It's a question of clarification for Gina. Do you mean to hold that the default is that it's permissible to argue with strangers?
One way of putting the question. So argue is tricky. Argue implies, um, allows for a range of respect variables. So the kind of person who just likes to get in arguments and roams around a public park just starting fights, and imagine a person who just likes to argue and will take any side whatsoever. They don't care if it's true or not, they don't believe it or not, they just want to argue. And so they walk up to strangers and say provocative things just to have an argument. That I don't think is okay or permitted by any of this. On the other hand, if it's a person who sincerely believes what they're saying and thinks what they're saying is right and thinks that it matters that other people around them get it right, yeah, I think that permits a certain range of engagement. Again, the word argue is going to matter a lot. Like there are different ways of arguing. There are ways of arguing that are respectful and considerate, and also and really key. I don't know if I flagged this. I think it's really key that you have to be open to this going both ways. So if you want to approach a stranger and convince them they're wrong, you have to be genuinely open to the possibility you will come out convinced that they were right and you were wrong. If you're not open to that, then you're not meeting the conditions of accepting moral equality that I see as background to all of this. But if you meet all those conditions, yeah, it by default is permissible to argue with strangers.
Isn't there tension though, Regina, with the person I think of is the one who sincerely believes they are right and that people are doing things they shouldn't be doing. If you get the model person that you have in mind, it seems like the person who's going to be aware enough of fallibility to not want to engage in these kinds of things. Do you see what I'm getting at? If you really have the right attitude, especially about moral matters, then you're not going to be inclined to do this. Except,
What about
go ahead, get for it.
Because what about Socrates? Because Socrates claims, I don't know anything. I'm just here to learn by engaging with strangers. I mean, I think that's mostly bullshit. I think Socrates thought he knew lots of stuff. But at least officially, Socrates was like, I don't know anything at all. So is that okay if he really meant that? He's not approaching with a domineering attitude of I'm going to condescend to you. He's approaching with I don't know anything. I'll learn by arguing with you. And if I'm right, we'll both be persuaded. Is that okay in your view, Terry?
No, well, I think there's some problems with it. Yeah, I mean, there's a version of Socrates, where he's sitting around and people are coming to him to hear from him. There's a version of him where he's, going around annoying people and poking and prodding them and showing how don't know anything, and that, he doesn't either, but at least he knows he doesn't know, whatever. There's something for me bothersome. There's, there are questions of why we don't do this, why we don't have, we wouldn't want a world in which it wouldn't work so well if we're not minding our own business. But I just think it's something about some of the things in George's paper about this too, about timing and those issues and space and all of those things that people need in order to do it for, and especially if it comes to morality, because I do think it's a do it yourself activity. Figuring this stuff out, and to the extent that others try to get in the business of helping you do that, it makes it much harder.
I might jump in here on this. This is an attempt to maybe try to bring some of like Gina and Terry's and George's views closer together. So Gina, when you talked about like approaching a stranger, I think you a couple times talked about like being polite and respectful. And so the version of that comes to mind is, so, out on our outside my office is our quad. And like a couple times I've been approached out there by Mormon missionaries because there's a LDS church just sort of across the road. And they're very polite, and they ask if they can talk to me. And in a way, I think, and most of the time I say no. One time I said yes, didn't go anywhere, but it was, but I feel like that was key. If they just like walked up to me and started talking, that would feel very different. Like they walk up to me and started making their case. That would be very different than asking like, hey, can I talk to you? I mean, can we say like basic politeness includes micro invitations that can be accepted or declined, and that maybe that's enough? So yeah, also, I guess for both sides, like Gina, could that be enough for you? That like, sure, the politeness involves sort of like acceptance or giving people opportunities to decline. And then Terry, is that enough of an invitation for you? Just a casual like, hey, how's it going? If it's clearly meant to open up a conversation. And then George, feel free to weigh in too on how you see this coming.
No, I'm not particularly happy with that. With even the asking. I mean, you knew there's a church across the street already, right? It's there if you want it. I think there's still something problematic about it.
Can I ask Terry, like, is the reluctance, is there a kind of like, so is it part of it like a kind of faith that people can figure out the moral truths on their own, or is it rather like, hey, like live and let live? So even if they get it wrong, so be it. Because you might think, look, moral matters are really complex, and we do need to. No one can really figure it out on their own, so we have to kind of engage collectively to get closer to do things right. And so you might think, I mean, if you're that consideration might make one lean more towards kind of view that Colin and Regina are adopting. But alternatively, you might think, look, actually, like a lot of moral truths, people can, we don't need to kind of work them out, work collectively to sort them out. Or you might think, well, even if we do really, we do need to kind of collectively work to improve, our judgments of these issues. Still, like, there's something kind of personal about these matters. So for this reason, like even kind of politely approaching someone shouldn't be the kind of presumptive default.
I think it's some of
yeah.
I think it's some of all of that. I think some of live and let live. People can figure things out for themselves to some extent. And maybe the most problematic part of all of it is that when I think or someone thinks they've got it figured out to the point where they can intrude, intervene, interfere, whatever those things are. Now, I'm not, though, I think in the ideal world, we could do everything ourselves, but it's not ideal. And so lots of things we have to do are collective projects. And I believe in influence. I believe in, one way to look at this is not that I reject rational persuasion. I accept all the forms of influence in the right kinds of context, in the right kinds of relationships. And so Colin and the person proselytizing didn't have any kind of relation. Person's trying to start one maybe, but there are all kinds of situations we find ourselves in where we want to achieve ends, realize our values, and we need other people to do that with. And that's where we, invite others in. the source is us, I think, to bring someone in to help us get to that point, as opposed to the other way around, where someone comes to you. So I think the other piece, I don't know if everyone read the piece or not, the Garnett piece. The second order autonomy stuff is completely fine with me. I mean, that's, you can consent to being in certain kinds of relationships where you allow behaviors that would otherwise be very problematic in terms of respecting someone's autonomy.
Cool. Okay, we've got another question. Although, Gina, if you wanted to weigh in on the last thing, feel free to. Yeah. Okay, let's see. So we have a question from Kelly asking, this is directed at Terry. Would you think there's something problematic about, for example, approaching a family and asking if they're willing to talk about the value of a liberal arts education as compared to a vocational one? A Mormon missionary version of, well, like people like me do regularly. So yeah, approaching a family and asking if they're willing to talk about the value of a liberal arts education as opposed to a vocational one.
Strangers, I'm assuming.
Yeah, sounds like it. Although if that,
yeah, I'm assuming it's not you're not, now when you're
Yes.
walking around our campus as a, tour or something, maybe that's enough of an invitation to say, hey, let's tell you the wonders of a liberal arts education or whatever. But yeah, that strikes me as not the person's business to be chasing down families and advocating for one form of education over another.
This is a slight side point, but it's a thing I've been thinking about during the last couple minutes. In the real world, often these cases, like approaching strangers and talking about stuff, is actually pretty hard to distinguish from social power plays and domineering. So a lot of times, and this is especially true on social media, but social media is the worst for this, people will pretend to be engaged in sincere rational persuasion with a back and forth, an open dialogue, et cetera, when really the whole reason they're doing it is to show off in front of an audience that they are morally better and smarter than the person they're talking at. That happens all the time on social media, and I think it happens sometimes even in real life, face to face. And it's very hard diagnostically to distinguish the two. And so one reason we might be, and I'm trying to hedge towards something closer to what Terry's saying, one reason we might be worried about the approaching strangers, even when you are sincere, is that it's often reasonable for the other person to think what you're doing is the insincere, domineering, showing off nonsense, especially on social media, but maybe even on campus as well. And if it's reasonable for the person to think that's what you're doing, then it's reasonable for them to perceive it as a kind of domineering gesture, and you should avoid engaging in things people reasonably perceive as domineering gestures. And so a lot of the stuff about politeness and asking and so forth is supposed to be ways of canceling the presupposition that what you're doing is actually domineering rather than sincere. And I think, at least on my view, that explains a lot of this. Like a lot of it's not necessarily that politeness is crucial for its own sake, but rather what it does is it signals that you are not engaged, or you're less likely to be engaged in objectionable forms that look like sincere persuasion but aren't really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to shoot that over, Gina. Yeah, here's another question from the chat. This one's a little more intense, so whoever wants to take it. The question reads, do the police deserve our deference? They seem to lack both empirical and moral authority, yet they demand deference. They will go up to strangers, request that they are spoken to, and can even demand one's identification or detain them without reason if they don't respond to the police officer. Are they not the ultimate example of breaking the rules of persuasion, respect, and politeness? All right, who wants to tackle it?
Let's start with the simple model and work our way back. Simple model, you're on a sinking boat. And better. Simple model, you're on a Delta Airlines flight from Minneapolis to Toronto that flipped over. Actually, this actually happened in the real world 2 weeks ago. on the tarmac, about 20 miles from where I am right now. Okay, airplane flips over. Flight attendants are not super polite in the way they tell you to immediately leave your bags behind, get off the plane. They aren't saying please and thank you every second. That's okay. It's an emergency, and they've been trained to direct a crowd for the way that's most likely to save everybody's lives. So that's a simple case. Reason backwards from there. At least sometimes police officers are doing that in a more causally attenuated way. Sometimes police officers are trying to steer people away. Actually, there's another airplane example about Colin, you might remember this. This was like what, 15 years ago, more than that. That airplane landed in the Hudson River in New York. People remember this? It was just a New York thing. I can't remember. Anyway, airplane landed in the Hudson River. I happened to live near the river at the time, and I went down to the shore, and the airplane floated right by me. And then the NYPD came along and grabbed us all and dragged us away because they seemed to believe the airplane could explode at any moment. It did not explode. So it was a bit odd, but it was probably good they were doing that just in case. So I'm trying to circle back around. Now, I think the point of the question is often police officers are not acting in emergency contexts, and nevertheless can sometimes be bullying, can sometimes be demanding of deference they aren't necessarily due. That seems objectionable, but I guess I'm trying to find a middle route and acknowledge that, like, ideally, police officers act this way in circumstances where it serves the public good that they do. So long as we can allow conceptually that happens sometimes, then we have to attend to the details, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? Yeah, and by the way, I mean, since this is a recorded session, don't want to press anyone to stick their neck out too far on this, but I do appreciate people raising the hard questions. Here's another question in the chat. It seems like some public activities might be inherently or more implicitly inviting for conversation, and others less so. Littering in public versus eating a meat sandwich in public. Taking out the legality, maybe there's an example activity drawing more attention to yourself, and therefore you're being more inviting. Maybe you're reading a flat earth book in public. I don't know, that's probably a better example. Does this seem true, right? So yeah, conspicuously reading like a flat earth book in large print in public, is that more of an invitation for engagement than eating a sandwich or...
Well, Regina pointed out earlier that being polite and approaching another person could signal one's sincerity, and so there, I think the broader point might be that on both sides, like potential targets of rational persuasion as well as would-be rational persuaders, engage in all kinds of micro behaviors that might signal not just sincerity, but also like an openness or willingness to engage on an issue. And I think all those can bear on, in actual cases, like one's reasons to approach or not to another person.
I probably would not find someone reading a book by themselves an invitation to have a conversation with me. But there are certain things like maybe wearing T-shirts with messages or something. You see different kinds of, advocating a cause, or, someone shirt says, "Ask me why I hate you," or whatever it is. I can imagine cases where people are engaging in behavior, doing certain kinds of things, and messaging themselves that come close to an invitation.
There used to be a T-shirt, I don't know if it's still around, that in big print it said "Your favorite band sucks." And I knew someone who, I forget who this is, but I talked to someone who owned it and said, yeah, like at least one person was insulted and started arguing back with them. So it was interpreted as an invitation, whereas I think it wasn't meant as one.
So can I ask a question? May I? probably most everyone on this in this session is a moral philosopher interested in moral philosophy. And then how often or ever do you interfere or not interfere, engage other people out of the blue about morality or some moral issue? And I do think there's a lot of there's expertise here about some of these issues that are some there's some hard issues and some issues aren't so hard, and we see things that we think probably aren't that hard. I'm guessing most people don't, and there may be different reasons not to engage. You don't want to start an argument, or you don't have time, you don't identified as a philosopher, whatever it is. But I wonder if there's something more than that. If there's this kind of, out of respect for other people's rationality, autonomy, something else, even though we may know better, believe we know better, we don't do it.
I mean, I'll take the bait, Terry, because I think here I'm maybe closer to Gina, where in the past couple of years I've started doing it a bunch. Like now, all my book projects are based on basically I get an idea and then I go sort of talk to people, largely non-academics. And I think people feel it as done right. People feel it as a compliment. Like I want to sincerely talk with them about like a serious matter. Like George was saying, a lot of moral issues, they're hard. And so, inviting someone into sort of a community is a compliment. But it's not me walking up to people and just sort of jumping in. It's more, there's a conversation already. Well, I've done some cold calling for like political stuff. That's different. But other cases, it's like in a conversation, something comes up, and then like all of a sudden I'd say like, hey, actually, can we talk about this? Like, I actually want to hear more about that. So it's not me like lecturing them about moral philosophy, because I agree that would just be obnoxious. But I think actually there is something exciting about having someone suddenly want to like, not just talk about the weather, but actually like, let's get into some important moral stuff.
Is that like rational engagement or reflection as opposed to persuasion? I mean, I see different versions of this. You could say like, I work on climate ethics, and what you're doing is bad. That's that one version. Another one is just like I don't think there's anything wrong with starting conversations with people generally. You're sitting on a plane next to someone and where are you from? Whatever. That doesn't strike me as problematic. Doesn't strike me as, hey, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? Have a conversation. For me, it's the trying to get someone to move in a particular direction is that I find problematic or potentially problematic.
So, I do think more of an invitation is required, but yeah, I think as long as they know what they're getting into. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I usually refrain from getting into these moral debates for non-moral reasons, because I don't want to embarrass myself, or other reasons, so on and so forth. An interesting thing, though, is I also think about, if I am sort of cautious about, say, being too forward with someone that I don't really know. They've voiced a moral opinion that I don't share. I sort of want to engage in conversation with them, but I don't really know that person. And so I might take some time and I think to myself, well, should I approach them? It could actually cut both ways. So I think you could actually disrespect the person by thinking to yourself, they're not like the people I know. They're not going to engage meaningfully in this conversation. And I think we do this a lot, actually. I think we pass upon opportunities to engage with other people all the time for reasons that aren't actually theirs. And that can be disrespectful. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. I think it's also interesting how we can disrespect the other person. I want to argue in one of my papers, we treat them paternalistically, actually, when we think that it's not competency, but for whatever reason, we don't think that they're going to be game for the conversation we're going to bring to them.
Daniel, I like that point, and I hear a chime with some of Maisha Cherry's work on anger. The idea that sometimes moral anger is directing moral anger at a person is a way of showing respect to them as a moral agent, as somebody whose actions matter, and somebody whose ability to assess good and bad moral reasons is being treated respectfully. I think that's right. Some cases of anger I think get more complicated, but when we talk about moral persuasion, I think what you're saying, and along the lines that Cherry is arguing for, just has to be right. That like refusing to engage in sincere moral persuasion with certain types of people is a certain sort of violation of their dignity. It's basically I don't take you seriously as somebody who shares the space of reasons with me, and so I'm not even going to bother. That seems really objectionable. So this is part of what motivates me to think we have a more of a positive obligation to at least make ourselves open to these exchanges. Personally, I don't like confrontation, so it'd be very rare for me to approach a stranger about something I think they're doing wrong. But in principle, I don't think it's a bad thing to do. And I have an exception for people who listen to music without headphones on a very crowded subway. I will talk to them about why it's bad to be inconsiderate.
Colin, I had a question that, I mean, it seems like you're saying you talk to people about like your book projects, but it seems like that's more sort of in the mode of Socrates, where you're still trying to figure things out when you engage in these conversations, rather than a case where you have a strong conviction about some matter and then you dive in and seek, engage with others. Or am I wrong about that?
I mean, yeah, a lot of conversations are like that, but like I did a fair amount of political phone banking in the fall in the lead up to the November election, and that, which I think, regardless of your political leanings, if you're a moral philosopher, I think it's eye-opening to call up people unsolicited and see how they react. And there are people who just hang up. Plenty of people just hang up, of course. Few people are like enthusiastically accept the invitation to a conversation,
Colin, I have a
but some
question.
kind of reluctantly do, and then like I don't know, sometimes they really appreciate it.
Colin, I have a question for you. When you do the phone banking, are you sincerely open to the possibility that the people you're calling could convince you to change your mind?
So slightly more specific, I'm open to the possibility that I will learn something from them.
Like a logical fact about them, or
No,
about...
like that I'll learn something meaningful from them. So, but I actually think I can do whatever. This is getting into sort of like substantive views. For me, I feel like that's enough. Even if I think like there is zero chance they would change my view. This is true. There was zero chance they were going to change my mind about the presidential election. Zero. Nonetheless, I was like, did make a real effort to like learn from them without knowing what it was that I was going to know, like what it would be. And even maybe saying it's zero, like, I don't know, like, there's I can't imagine a situation where it would have happened, but it felt like that was enough for it to feel like they felt taken seriously. Once or twice, someone seemed to nudge them, their views shifted a little bit, but I don't. So I'm a big advocate of philosophers getting out and having more conversations with people. But I think all three of you are right that it generally shouldn't be coming up to someone in a way that could, especially ways that could come across as like, let me show you how much smarter I am than you, or how much more ethical I am than you. Sorry, it was a long answer, but
No, interesting. I think you and I tend to agree on these things, but your answer to that tells me that, on my view at least, you're doing something wrong when you phone bank. If you aren't at least in principle open to being persuaded to reverse your view on it, I think that you are not engaging in fully respectful terms.
Maybe. Although, I mean, I could give you a real thin in principle. Like, is it epistemically possible in some sort of negative conceivability? Sure, why not? But that's so thin, I don't think it counts for very much. Okay, well, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. We have another 20 minutes left. We don't have to grind everyone's mind down though, because this is our three panelists have been on pretty continuously, which is terrific. So let's maybe another. How about we go another 5 minutes if anyone else wants to bring any other questions in. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. And also the three of you, if there's any points you wanted to circle back to, now could be an okay time if there's anything we've left on the side.
Maybe one thing that was kind of lurking in the background that we haven't talked about has to do with the alleged fishiness of moral deference and moral testimony. I mean, in the literature of moral epistemology, there's a lot of people who think that there's something objectionable about taking a moral claim on someone else's word, either because you don't have the sufficient understanding to count as mastering the moral concepts, or because it's in some sense a violation of your duty to preserve your own autonomy as a moral judge, et cetera, et cetera. I hope I've described the objection fairly. I don't feel the force of this at all. I don't think it's a problem to pool our moral agency with people we recognize as moral equals. But I want to put on the table because I know that that's not a common view. So I'm curious what other people think. Do you feel the force of the fishiness worry and think that maybe that's a reason to avoid moral deference?
Do you also think that it's unproblematic to expect other people to defer to you? And you focused on the issue of just the would-be persuadee and they're deferring, but yeah.
Yeah, good question. I was trying to get at that indirectly earlier when I said that on empirical questions, domain experts have reasonably expect others to defer to them and have they do nothing wrong in expecting deference. In the moral domain, because I don't think anybody's a moral expert in the relevant sense, I don't think anybody's entitled to expect deference in that way. And so then it gets murkier. But yeah, I'm sort of like talking sideways here because there's a whole background meta-ethical theory that I've written about second personal reasons and about why we have an obligation to move our volition towards the volitions others demand of us. But I don't want to give a talk here, so I'm not invoking the whole meta-ethical background. But I do think that for non-expertise reasons, in fact, for moral equality reasons, we actually ought to expect a minimal amount of deference from each other and simultaneously expect of ourselves that we will defer to those we disagree with. And yeah, basically, I think there's continual rational pressure towards conciliation in cases of moral disagreement, conciliation in all directions.
So this is like deference with respect to some perhaps matter of fact that bears on a moral question, or do you think it's deference with respect to the moral issue?
Deference, yeah. But what I'm talking about now is with respect to the specifically moral part. If we're talking about matters of fact and the empirical stuff, then I think that's a standard epistemic question about deference to expertise. But if we're talking specifically about the moral domain, I don't think anybody's an expert in the relevant sense. So that can't be what's going on.
So you're saying that the target that all of us should have reasons to defer to someone who is an expert, or to
no, all of us have reasons to defer to all of us. We are all moral equals when it comes to assessing the force of moral reasons. If you're a moral agent, that's enough.
But then what does that mean? That means you give up your belief, like No, but what is the deference involved in? That's like sort of just giving up your belief. Yeah.
I assume we have degrees of belief. And so, but basically what I'm assuming here
is I see. So you kind of weaken your credence or something. You might. Yeah.
Basically the conciliationist line in the pure disagreement literature and epistemology, but with some modifications and universally applied. Everyone ought to defer everyone ought to conciliate slightly all the time as a result of encountering disagreement. This is a very unorthodox view, but I think it follows from the meta-ethical stuff that I don't want to lecture everybody about right now.
So the deference paradoxically might lead us to engage in more rational persuasion or more moral suasion. So I'm getting at, like, you do it in, my view would be you back off. Your view is you're backing off in a sense, but the fact that you have to back off means that you need to engage with others. And that's the rational or the moral suasion piece. Am I right about that?
Yeah, so the core of it is basically that, but what it means to recognize others as moral equals is to see others as having a say in how we collectively live our lives, how we shape a shared space of reason-based volition that shapes the shared social world. And so moral equality means we all get a say. And that means we all get a say in how we all employ our volition to shape that world. And so that I'm trying to do this very fast hand wavy version of a thing that actually takes like 30 pages to explain. But the thought is supposed to be that, yeah, that's the grounds for us both needing to defer to some extent, but also, I think this is even more controversial, actively putting ourselves out there to be influenced by others in moral terms. I think we have a duty to do that as well. So that's my view.
We may be closer together than I thought, because if you take that view and then think you need to put yourself out there, open yourself up to others, that's the invitation. It gets the same thing going, but from a different direction.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah. And I think I sympathize with you to the extent that people want to try to persuade each other as like I've got it right and you don't, and let me tell you how it is. I don't think that's a very morally valuable attitude to take. But if you start from we're all moral equals here, here's how it seems to me, tell me how it seems to you, and I'm open to it turning out a different way, then it doesn't look so objectionable to me to initiate that back and forth.
Nice. Okay, well, we seem to have reached a point of semi-convergence, which is an awfully nice note to wrap up on. It is a little early, but I don't know. But I think we've had a really good discussion. So a few thanks. Thanks again to Daniel Galley for organizing this. Thanks to Mike Morris for all the tech support. And thanks to Gina, Terry, and George for a terrific discussion. And last, thanks to everyone who tuned in for the questions. This will be up, I believe this will be up on the APA website if anyone wants to go back for anything else, but I really appreciate everyone.
Thank you.
There's one thing.
Oh yeah, go for it, Daniel.
Question that I did want to ask before everything is over here. I wanted to go back to the example that we looked at, and if we say take Agnes doesn't actually doubt that her daughter will understand. So Agnes actually, let's say in this new sort of example, that she actually has a lot of faith in her daughter understanding the reasons that she's giving and why they support the conclusion. So basically, she has faith. The difference between the two cases, this revised cases, Agnes has faith in Olivia's rational capacities, or more faith, at least here. I'm wondering if it's a case of deference still, if Olivia sort of takes the evidence and says, okay, I'm going to change my mind, the evidence that Agnes has given. But I want to add another thing. So that this seems like unproblematic. If Agnes gives Olivia these reasons, Olivia ponders these reasons, and Olivia changes her mind. That seems sort of unproblematic. But let's add something to that case where Agnes expects Olivia to rationally appreciate the reasons she's giving, but she is closed off to Olivia's sort of counter arguments. So she's not about to hear Olivia sort of, if Olivia has an objection, she doesn't want to hear it. She's completely sort of deaf to that. Here, I want to say, well, it's strange because Agnes seems to be respecting Olivia's rational autonomy, but at the same time, we still want to say that there's something wrong with her closing herself off to Olivia's reasons. I can see how this is a case of deference, but interestingly, the problem with this case of deference isn't undermining Olivia's rational autonomy, but rather there seems to be a relational sort of problem in the sense that Agnes is taking some sort of position of authority over Olivia, because she's saying, look, I can offer you these reasons, but I'm not going to hear back any sort of reasons from you. So there's like an authoritative, I want to say, error in Agnes's approach to Olivia, even if it doesn't undermine her autonomy. And so when we think of deference, like what's wrong with deference, the first thing that I think at least is, well, it's undermining the other person's autonomy, the target's autonomy, because they're choosing something when it is objectionable. They're choosing something that they haven't rationally thought through, and they're just sort of deferring to the other person. But here, it's not an undermining of autonomy, but rather it's this authoritative error, I want to say. And yeah. I was wondering just what you think about that revised case. Yeah.
To me, it still deeply matters whether we're talking about the moral part of it or the empirical part of it. I lost track in your revision of the case if that mattered to the way you revised it.
Yeah, so we would be dealing with the same moral problem. Yeah, so not the empirical.
Not the empirical part. Yeah. Yeah. So it kind of doesn't matter that Agnes is a climate scientist then. Agnes is just a person talking to another person about what to do morally about a set of now mutually agreed upon empirical facts. Is that right?
Yeah, and the big difference, I guess, from the original case is Agnes's intention, because
Yes.
the intention is that Olivia will understand the reasons that she's giving her. But yes, yeah.
But she's not open to hearing anything back in response. Yeah.
And
that
that's right. And I take this sort of case as a somewhat common case where we do actually, I was talking about the paternalistic sort of attitude that you could take with like saying, oh, this person isn't ready for my conversation, right? But actually, okay, let's say that we don't take that and we actually go up to the person and trust them that they'll understand the reasons I'll give. But another sort of problem that could arise is that we're just closed off to hearing their counter arguments. And those cases, I feel, they're common, but then also present a different problem. And I don't think it's an undermining sort of autonomy of the target. That's not really the problem going on, but it's something different.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It may or may not undermine autonomy, but it's objectionable in that it denies the fundamental moral equality that is the source of one's entitlement to even be speaking to another person about how they ought to use their volitional choices. So if the presupposition of my speaking to you is you ought to change your choices in the way I say, but I don't even have to think about whether I ought to change my choices in the way you say, then that suggests a failure to recognize fundamental moral equality.
I think it depends on the relationship. And I can imagine relationships where I think it would be perfectly permissible. I mean, you say you hire a coach to help you do something, and the person says, "Here's the way it's going to go. I'm going to explain this as best I can to you, give you the reasons what you ought to do to achieve the goals that you want to achieve," and lays it all out, and you understand it, and you want to push back, and the person says, "Not part of the deal. That's not the way this works." And that would be okay. I mean, it depends on what the relationship is like and what the legitimate expectations are within that relationship. But I guess if you take some of those things out, I mean, I guess it shows there are lots of ways to get this wrong, right? This will be one of the ways to get it wrong in certain kinds of circumstances.
And just a last sort of point, I guess my question in this revised case really gets to, honestly, Terry Price, your sort of I'm really responding to that chapter, that fourth chapter in your book, for one of my papers. And I think you put a heavy emphasis on the problem with rational persuasion. So the problem with rational persuasion is it's not so different than all of the other methods like manipulation, coercion. It's sort of like it doesn't have this sort of lofty position that most philosophers give it. And the reason is because it undermines the target's autonomy. And I guess I wanted to sort of like focus in on that because the the case that I did give, it doesn't seem like autonomy is really the rational autonomy is really the problem. It seems like there's another problem that's going on, and that is this again, I just call it an authoritative error. It's where one position is just taking a different sort of authoritative position or a higher authoritative position over the target. But it doesn't, in most cases, I don't see that it's actually undermining the target's rational autonomy.
The closer to the Garnett view, it's not the autonomy issue, it's the interpersonal rule. Is that what you're kind of getting at? Or not necessarily?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like yes, I mean the authoritative error may offend against like the value of more equality, but it might also shape the interaction that the rational persuader engages in, and engaging in rational persuasion in ways that might undermine or limit the autonomy of the target.
One thing in the teacher-student context, you can imagine doing everything right, or not everything right, but most things right with students, letting them think for themselves, figure it out for themselves, but being closed off to them changing your view. It just seemed to be a failing, but a different kind of failing, right? One kind of, you have double failing. You want them to believe what you believe. And so you spend all your time trying to get them to believe what you believe, and you don't listen to what they have to say. Another one is you don't spend all your time trying to get them to believe what you believe. You let them believe what they believe after careful consideration of all the evidence on all sides. But you don't allow them to encourage you to change your beliefs. Possible. Seems to me.
Right.
That was really helpful. Thanks everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
Well,
okay, good. We got our final lap around the track. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, well, we are about at time, 1 minute to go. Thanks again to everyone who helped, who made this possible. Thanks for everyone who tuned in. And I'll just say, I think one thing that's cool about these sessions is just having lots of discussion, which hopefully is like the start of, starting or strengthening relationships and conversations that people can keep having. So, yeah, it's really great to have everyone involved. Okay, and with that, yeah, big thank you for everybody. Hope to see you all around, virtually or otherwise.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. Great job, Colin, Daniel.
Oh yeah, thanks again for being part of it, George. Super appreciate it.
Okay.
And looking forward to seeing you here in Seattle.
Yeah, of course. End of April, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll touch base about that.
Yeah, I hope to talk more about these issues too then during the visit.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay. All right. Take care, guys.
Cool. Yeah, good work, Daniel.
Hey, thanks, Colin, again for organizing this and really sort of, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Totally. Yeah, no, this is really fun.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, thanks again, Mike.